Guys, this is such a gift. This is God's heart written out for us. You want to know God's heart? It's written out for you. And so today we're going to get in and study and discover a little bit more what God has in store for his people. So I'm going to have you open up to the book of John. It's the fourth book of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. If you don't have a Bible, there's a stack of Bibles over there, and I hope that you have a Bible open in front of you as we go through this passage. We'll be looking at John chapter 8 today as we continue our series called Lock It Down. We called it that because anytime you finalize a decision, right, you lock it in, you lock it up, and you lock it down. I mean, you purchase the airline tickets, right? You buy the ring, you sign the papers, you make this thing official. And that's the whole point of the Gospel of John, is that we would lock it down on Jesus and keep locking it down. So today we're going to be looking at John chapter 8. And for the last 2 weeks, we have wrapped up chapter 7, okay, of John's Gospel. Chapter 7, and it's been a fascinating study of the need for revelation. The need we have for understanding and the wonderful gift of the Holy Spirit that opens our eyes, because you know what? We have so much to learn. One day we're going to be ruling and reigning with Christ. I mean, he has a lot to deposit to us. And so we are in the university called Jesus. There is just so much to know. Once you get one degree in one thing, there's just so many other fields of Christ that you need to continue to learn. So we have so much to learn. And so that takes us right into this week, because in this chapter today, Jesus takes us to school. I mean, Jesus, he is the master teacher. I was just talking to April, right? Man, Jesus always had a story on tap. He has always had something to teach. He loved going around city to city, village to village, teaching and proclaiming the gospel and healing the sick. That's just what he did. So Jesus today takes us to school. Now, how many people like school? Okay? How many people hate school? You're like me, because in high school, I did not like school. Man, I was just there for the friends. I was there for the sports. I was not there to do academics. I just limped by. I did just enough to get through high school, and really college was kind of the same story. So school wasn't very easy for me, but once in a while you'd get a really good teacher. And good teachers make all the difference in the world. Right? I mean, they just know their subject material. They have a passion for it. They love the student, and it just makes a magical moment. You don't care what the subject is. If you find a good teacher, they will inspire you to learn. And so today we're going to witness the greatest teacher ever, and that's Jesus. Man, I can't think of anybody who did it better than Jesus. Because today we're going to see this great example of his ability to make something out of nothing. I don't think there's any teacher that likes to be disrupted. I mean, they have an agenda for class. They have a goal. They have a plan. And then to have sideways energy come in and disrupt and distract the whole thing can really throw you for a number. But great teachers, or shall I say amazing teachers, have an ability to stay in the moment even when distraction comes, even when disruption comes. If something happens, they can make something out of nothing. They can flow in the moment. They're nimble. They can do that. Throw them a curveball, and they can still connect. And that's the genius of a good teacher. So today, we're going to watch Jesus in action and learn that some of the best lessons of life are those that are unplanned. Some of the best lessons of life. That teacher has so much in him that even disruption comes, something productive can come from that time. So let's open up our passage today, John chapter 8, and read this episode together. We're going to watch the master teacher do his thing. Some of the best lessons of life are those that go unplanned. So John chapter 8, we're going to actually pick up with the last verse of John chapter 7. And we're going to read through verse 11 of chapter 8. It says here, they went each to his own house. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, and early in the morning he came again to the temple. And all the people came to him, and he sat down, and he taught them. And the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery, and placing her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So, what do you say? And this they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. And Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. And once more he bent down and he wrote on the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones, and Jesus was left alone with a woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? She said, No one, Lord. And Jesus said, Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more. Some of the best lessons of life are those that go unplanned. So, before we get too far into this, I need to address something that you might have already noticed if you look at this passage in any modern day translation. You're going to notice that this section of Scripture has been specially noted. Right? Oftentimes, translations will put some brackets around this section and put a footnote here saying the following. This is what the ESV says. The earliest manuscripts do not include 753 through 811. What is that all about? Well, that brings me to one of my favorite topics, and that's how we got our Bible. Okay, we're just going to spend about 5 minutes talking about what they're meaning there. I love this subject. I actually made a class about 15 years ago about how we got our Bible. And I think it's a healthy thing for everybody to know. Okay? It took me about, the better part of a year to come up with the material, and I got about 15 weeks of content here. And so this is a big subject. Sometime I would love to roll out at some point, and we can go through this in a classroom setting. But let me just suffice it to say, let me break it down like this. Here's the subject. Here's the idea of what they're talking about here. Before books were printed, like we have today, okay? Before this printed book came into being, which was about 1452, before 1452, books were handwritten. That's why they call them manuscripts, right? Manu comes from the word manual, which is, once you throw, there it is. Manuscript. So manual, hand, script means writing. So a handwritten copy of the Bible. So anytime you wanted to have a Bible, you had to have somebody who would handwrite you a Bible. And that's how Bibles were produced. So you can imagine this would allow for errors. Things would be misspelled. Sometimes a word or a letter would be omitted. Sometimes things would find their way in. Sometimes they'd find their way out. Sometimes they're intentional, sometimes unintentional. So this was kind of a fluid text, which you can imagine would be a cause for concern. But not so much with the Bible. And here's why. The more copies you have of something, the greater your ability to detect the errors. Let me give you an example. The works of Lucretius. He was a Roman philosopher about 50 years before the time of Christ. We have his works today. But do you know how many manuscripts there are? How many handwritten copies there are that we have of Lucretius? 2. So when you look at 2 manuscripts and you see discrepancy between the 2, which one is wrong? You don't know. It's one word against another. So that's a very fluid text. Now, Plato has 7 manuscripts available to us today, which is better because you can see one discrepancy here and the 6 others agree. You can detect that's the error. So you can come up with a standardized text. However, that's still not very stable. Aristotle has 49, which is much better. Homer's Iliad has 643, which is excellent. Produces a very stable text. Look at how many manuscripts we have of the New Testament. We have nearly 6,000 copies, all complete. Nearly 6,000 copies of the New Testament, which produces a very stable textual tradition. And what happened with this passage, 753 through 811, is that the translators brought all the translations together, all the manuscripts together, and detected that there is this section that's missing from some of the oldest copies of the Bible. So, however, Augustine was an early church father, and he preached from this passage that we're preaching today. Okay, and he knew that in his day there were some Bibles that were missing this passage. But he felt, his opinion was, that this passage wasn't added later, it was probably deleted earlier because of the scandalous nature of this text. Is Jesus condoning the sin of adultery? The woman got off free. She got off scot-free. He didn't bring any consequence whatsoever. And so other people can think, well, hey, if it happened to her, it can happen to me. I can just go and do what I want. So Augustine felt like some people deleted this early on because of the scandalous nature of this passage. Plus, if you take this passage out, this narrative does not flow very well. If you read from 752 and pick right back up at 812, it's very abrupt. Very abrupt. So he felt for those reasons that this passage is authentic, and I agree with Augustine and many other theologians of his day, scholars of his day. So we're going to take this passage today and treat it as an authentic part of the Gospel of John, and we're going to watch what the master teacher has to say. I want to entitle this message, The Scandalous Lesson. The Scandalous Lesson. And if you were to break this into 4 segments, this is how it would look. Class in session, class disruption, conversation curbed, lesson learned. So let's turn to chapter 7, verse 53, and look at this first section called Class in Session. 7:53 says this: they went each to his own house. You'll remember we just finished with chapter 7. They're at the Feast of Tabernacles. That means they're camping out all week long. And finally, they get to go home to their own house. How many like to go home after you've been camping for a week? Sleep in your own bed, sleep on your own pillow, take a shower, go to the refrigerator. So they're happy bees. They get to go back home. But look at this. Verse 1. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. It's interesting that him being far away from home, he didn't get to go home. He's in Galilee. He's all the way down in Jerusalem now. And nobody has chosen to host him because he's just way too controversial. They're putting too much skin in the game if they're going to have that guy to their house, calling himself God. And so here he goes up to the hillside and sleeps on the ground. Early in the morning, verse 2, look at the dedication. Early in the morning, Jesus came again into the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down, and he taught them. He is a dedicated unit. He is sleeping on the ground. He's getting up early in the morning. He's coming back into the classroom because he has so much more to teach. And he was good at it. So good that people were getting out of bed early in the morning to come and listen to him. When I was in college, I had organic chemistry. Rick? Organic chemistry. Do you know what time of the day? 7 a.m. Oh, man. And I was not good with the alarm clock. Man, I used to just snooze that thing over and over. I used to take like 2 hours and push the snooze button. So I would have to put the alarm clock across the room. I slept on the top bunk. So when I was single, I had my college mate right down there, and I would literally get in and out of bed for like an hour because it was so hard to get out of bed. That was who I was. And now somebody wakes me up, I'm up for hours. So times have changed. But back then, it was hard to get out of bed. But 7 o'clock in the morning, I had this teacher, and he was actually really good. The whole room was abuzz. There was a lot of interaction. He came with energy, and he was passionate about his subject, and everybody was really in the moment because he was a good professor. Jesus must have been the same. Because here they are, early in the morning, and class is in session. This is after the feast. There's a little bit of a letdown here. People are tired, and yet people are coming back for more and more and more because he is so engaging. He has so much good insight. I got to have more, and so they're hungry to hear this man in action. So the auditorium was packed. People were alert. Energy was in the room. Class is in session. But then we see class disruption. Major sideways energy comes into the scene here with verse 3. Look what happens. Verse 3. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery. And placing her in the midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery." Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So, what do you say? And this they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. So Jesus, early in the morning, right in the middle of teaching his class, has the scribes and the Pharisees come in and disrupt everything. Why? Because they caught a woman in the act of adultery. Caught her red-handed. And they were swift and decisive with their pronouncement. Do you know people can be really quick to condemn? Let me qualify that. Do you know church people can be really quick to condemn? I mean, that's what these guys were. Religious people can be so quick and so decisive. Why? Because we care about what's right and wrong. And if somebody does something wrong, ooh boy. If somebody does something right, excuse me, sorry. If somebody does something right, and if they do something, or if they don't do something right and they do something wrong, oh man, we get impassioned, don't we? You know, there's such a thing as right and wrong, and we should care about it deeply. But do you know that we can be so right that we can be dead wrong? Be really careful. When you know that you're right, be really, really careful. Because if we forget how to treat people, how to handle people, how to care for people, then you're wrong. No matter how right you are. Being right doesn't give us a right to treat people wrong. Be very careful. Right and wrong is a white-black situation. We feel strongly and passionately, but if we come in and treat people wrong just because we're right, you're wrong. Because you've forgotten how to treat people, how to care for people, how to handle people. So they haul this woman in front of everybody and make a public spectacle of her because what she did was wrong. But this goes beyond that. They're not just trying to use her as an example. They're trying to use her to get to Jesus. Because they knew how he would act. They knew he would be gracious. And they're just trying to get Jesus to step out of bounds and catch him. So they disrupted the class. They used the woman. And I wonder why they didn't use the guy. She committed adultery. You know, golf is a one-man sport. Swimming is a one-man sport. Running is a one-man sport. Adultery? That's a team sport. Where's the guy? And yet I think they found it easier to use the woman, which is reprehensible. So they disrupted class. They used the woman to put the teacher on the spot. Class disrupted. And I love his response. Check out the second sentence here, verse 6. Jesus bent down. 3 words. Everybody's rising up. Righteous indignation. And Jesus bent down. You know, he's like, this is not who I am, guys. The spirit in which you're rising up right now, this is not who I am. This is not what I'm about. Which reminds me of Ezekiel 33. It says, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked. None. But that the wicked will turn from his way and live. You guys seem to have pleasure in this. The death of the wicked is a pleasurable thing to you, it seems. But I have no pleasure. I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked. You want to put her to death. And you're enjoying the process because you think you were so right. You're wrong. This is not who I am. This is not what I represent. And Jesus bent down. So as I say, I'm not a part of this. Jesus bent down, verse 6, and wrote with his finger on the ground. I find that I've always been taken by that. Can you imagine that? Jesus just, everybody is up in a fury and he just gets down to the ground and just starts drawing in the sand. Kind of a mysterious gesture. So everything is halted, tensions are high, and he doesn't feel compelled to relieve the tension. I mean, the tension, you can cut it like a knife, and he doesn't feel compelled to do anything about the tension. Do people ever come to you like just really incensed about something? They're just up in arms and they're just enraged. And they want you to say something. They want you to do something. And they say, well, you need to go in there and ... Or if you had a mind about this situation, then you would ... Or a person in your position would ... And I would say be careful of channeling anybody else's energy. I've been guilty of this before. Have you? Somebody comes and they want you to speak into a situation and they bring the heat and you try to channel that heat when you haven't really even processed it. You haven't thought about it. You haven't prayed about it. And you just like a puppet go into the situation and try to fix it. I have been I have regretted doing things like that. And I refuse to carry somebody else's energy just because they're hot and try to fix the situation because I've been sent to do it as some errand boy. No. Be very careful of channeling somebody else's energy. And aren't you glad that Jesus thinks for himself? Oh, God, that Demetrius, he did such and such and such. Oh, get him, God. And he just comes over and gets me because somebody prayed it. No, he thinks for himself. Aren't you glad that Jesus doesn't act quickly? Aren't you glad that he doesn't serve up judgment quickly? Because if he did, man, I'd be in hell today. Don't you feel the same? I would be in hell today if he served up judgment quickly because of something I've done. He is the most patient, forbearing person who has ever and will ever exist. He is not a hothead. Verse 7. And as they continued to ask him, what do you say, Jesus? What do you say? What do you say? What do you say? He stood up and said to them, some of the most famous lines found in the Bible. Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw the stone at her. And once more, he bent down and wrote on the ground. Biggest mic drop ever. Boom! Man! You guys are just as guilty. Boom! Goes right back down, starts drawing back on the ground, and not a word is spoken. Class in session, class disruption, conversation curbed, and it's silent. And the best part of it all comes here in the last 3 verses. Verses 9 through 11. Where we find this deep and some would say scandalous lesson. There's a scandalous lesson here for us to learn. Scandalous in a very good way. To some, it would be like, oh, can't believe he did that. Verse 9 says, but when they heard it, what he just said, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones. It's kind of funny. The older ones had enough sense to admit their fallibility. The younger ones eventually follow suit. So beginning with the older ones, they walk out one by one, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. And Jesus stood up and said to her, woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? She said, no one, Lord. And Jesus said, neither do I condemn you. Neither do I condemn you. Some of you need to hear that this morning. Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more. She got off scot-free. She got off scot-free. Doesn't that allow people to just think that they can go around and commit any old immorality that they want to and not have any consequences? They can do anything they want, and God will treat them just like He treated this woman here? Don't you think that this passage will inculcate that idea that I can just go and just live how I want to? I don't think we need to be afraid of that. Because here's the lesson. This whole story has been working towards this one, I feel, very powerful lesson. And it's this. Undeserved blessing motivates unexpected behavior. Undeserved blessing. Woo! Oh, man, I know I deserve that, and He didn't give it to me. Motivates unexpected behavior. I wish we could see what this woman looked like after this point in time. Oh, man. The grace that just, went so deep, and the forgiveness and the release. I mean, I'm sure she went back and made restitution and lived a life that was sweetly surrendered to Jesus for all her days. Unexpected blessing motivates unexpected behavior. Because when you know that you don't deserve blessing and you've been blessed anyway, it has a transformative effect. Nothing cuts deeper than grace. When somebody has graced your life and you know you didn't deserve that and you got it, oh man. Amazing. So blessing motivates behavior. When I was in seminary, one of my first classes I took, man, I know I didn't do very good. But the professor gave me an A. I did not deserve that A. But do you know what it did in my life? I went on a holy terror. I told you my high school career was psh, my college career, psh, my seminary career started with a graceful A, and I went on a tear of A's ever since. What happened? I think something just like, oh man, oh thank you, and boom. Undeserved blessing will motivate unexpected behavior. But see, religion turns this whole thing on its head. Religion will say that behavior motivates blessing. Because if I can just perform my way in and do all these things, then God will accept me. He will approve of me, and He will bless my life. But that's not grace. That's works. That's performance-based religion. That's behavior modification. If I just modify my behavior, then I'll get in good. But that's behavior modification, not behavior transformation. And the only way you transform behavior is to apply grace to the heart. Undeserved blessing motivates unexpected behavior. Grace comes first. Grace comes first. Grace comes first. Can be scandalous to some people because it's not deserved. Grace comes first. Change comes next. And what about the sin? What about the sin, Demetrius? When she got off scot-free, what about the sin? Is Jesus condoning sin? Look at verse 11. Look at verse 11. What does he say? Neither do I condemn you. Go and live as you please. Does he say that? No. Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Sin no more. Don't do that. Don't do it. It's going to hurt your life. It's going to snuff out your life. It's going to kill you. The wages of sin is death. Stay away from that stuff. Don't do it. Don't do it. I love it. You know, they want him to pass judgment. They want him to pass sentence, and all he does is he condemns sin, but he doesn't condemn people. It's a big lesson out of this passage. He condemns sin. He doesn't condemn people. And if we're going to be Jesus people, guess what that makes us? We're going to condemn sin. Don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, don't do it. But hey, that's not primary. Don't twist it. Don't get it twisted. It's grace. God loves you. I love you. I forgive you. Grace comes first. Grace comes first. Change comes next. In this, I think we see a beautiful blend between justice and compassion. Justice against sin and compassion for people. That's what Jesus does. So why does he bless us sinners? We're all sinners. We all stand in her shoes. We can all be hauled into the middle of the church by the scruff of our neck and have our sins pronounced over us. And yet, why does Jesus treat us so well? Why does he bless sinners such as we? Because he knows what gives us a fighting chance for transformation. The only thing that will give you a fighting chance to change is grace. Grace. I'm going to ask you to bow your heads. I'm going to have the music team come back up. And I want you to ask the Holy Spirit, what are you saying to me? Out of this scandalous lesson, what are you saying? And after we spend a few moments doing this, I'm going to ask the team to lead us in one last song of worship. And then we'll close our time with some prayer.